Our first speaker studies consciousness by altering it. Dr. Alexander Shulgin is a chemist and an author. He's also known as Dr. X. The New York Times calls Dr. Shulgin a one-man psychopharmacological research sector. Timothy Leary called him one of the century's most important scientists. By Shulgin's own account, he has created nearly 200 psychedelic compounds, among them stimulants, depressants, aphrodisiacs, empathogens, convulsants, drugs that alter hearing, drugs that slow one's sense of time, reading from the New York Times article, drugs that speed it up, drugs that trigger violent outbursts, drugs that deaden emotion. In short, a veritable lexicon of tactile and emotional experience. Many of these drugs, perhaps all of them, he has tested out on himself and his wife, with a few friends included at times. And in addition to inventing the drug ecstasy, Dr. Shulgin is a consultant, very much in demand, by an eclectic group of clients that include NASA, Bristol Laboratories, NIH, University of California, for his view on how to experience consciousness and what consciousness is. Please welcome Dr. Alexander Shulgin. Don't tell him I used his name Alexander.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here and a great honor to be here. I'm not a great lover of magic PowerPoint. Had I known that you were going to have a PowerPoint availability here, I probably would not have used it anyway, because every time I've tried using it, about 30% of the time at least, it fails, it falls apart somehow. It never quite gets to where I want to go. So I rather than put a lot of chemical structures, which would be boring to about 80% of the audience and fascinating to the other 20%, I suspect, I'll just use my hands and wave my hands as is appropriate. Molecules obviously are, rings and chains and nitrogens, and there's no problem about that at all. My interest in the area, actually, this is a nice opportunity. I spent a couple of years of my life upriver, 60 or so years ago, more than that, at Harvard, where I had the unfortunate pleasure of having a national scholarship which got me in there free. And I found that everyone else had parents who had enough money to get them in there, having paid their way. And I could find very little rapport with the masses of freshmen that were around me. So I found it much more pleasurable to go in the Navy and spend 3 years in the Atlantic in the anti-submarine patrol, which actually gave me a very nice beginning on chemistry, in that one of the books I had with me was a book by Paul Karrer, a Swiss chemist, written about 1938 or 1940. And it was a complete statement of the subtleties and the complexities of organic chemistry. And when you're spending 3 years in the Atlantic waiting for submarines, you have a lot of time spare. And I not only read the book, but substantially understood it. And it was a very, very great pleasure to get out of the Navy and back into the university at Berkeley, where I took organic chemistry as my major. And the greatest compliment I had was from a fellow named Kaysan, who was a lecturer there or professor at chemistry. And he said, by the way, he met him in the hall during the second year of organic chemistry. We're having a midterm this coming Tuesday, and you can take it if you want to, which I thought was quite a compliment, because the average on the first midterm was something like 62 points out of 100, and I had 100%. And he didn't know exactly why. I could answer the questions without any problem, because they were all in Paul Karrer's book, and I had memorized the book. Well, that's, I think, honest, but not much. Anyway, after that, I got into my AB in chemistry at Berkeley, a PhD in biochemistry at Berkeley. Got involved in a little laboratory. There are 5 of us, called BioRad Laboratory, that's now a multi-million-dollar operation. Had I stayed with them, I would have been a very, very rich millionaire with ulcers at this point. And I'm very glad I split the scene when there's still only 5 of us present. Did a little radioactive synthesis in their name. Did some postdoctorate work at Berkeley. Went to Dow Chemical Company, out with a branch of it there in Pittsburgh, near near the Bay Area in California. And it's there that I really got initiated into what turned out to be a very important change in my life. I had my first experience with mescaline about 1960, about 45 years ago. 400 milligrams of the sulfate, and had a good babysitter. And I had explored a great deal around various psychoactive drugs. This is supposed to be an erotic thing. That is supposed to be an amnesia thing. Each of these had their own little name. I had heard about mescaline, had never tried it. And that one day, that 8 or 10 hour experience, really changed my life for the next half century. I was totally fascinated with a drug that could get in there, allow you to see things you would not normally see, and yet you knew to be valid. I have a reasonably limited knowledge of colors. Suddenly I saw colors that I had never really appreciated before. I could look at a flower and observe the beauty of a flower, could not open the flower, could not touch it, but I observed the beauty of a flower. I had memories from childhood that I knew were valid, but I had not thought of them for years. It was a very, very delightful experience, but mainly what impressed me most thoroughly is that that experience was clearly not due, the contents of that experience were not in that 400 milligrams of the drug. The drug, what it did, it catalyzed my mind. It got my mind back into that particular area. So I looked upon these materials as being catalytic, not productive. They do not do what occurs. They allow you to express what is in you that you had not had the ability to get to and express yourself without the help of a material. So this really caught my fancy, and I said, if this little 400 milligrams of something could be an effective catalyst to reveal back to me what I had done, what I had seen, and such, there is a great potential here for medical use. And that caught me with my little knowledge of chemistry and my intense curiosity as what was going on upstairs in my head, and it was revealed by this mescaline experience. I really went into a true new direction of chemistry. And here is where I guess I kind of have to wave hands. Mescaline is a ring with 3 methoxy groups out here. Don't worry what a methoxy group is. Someone near you will probably explain it later. A carbon-carbon and a nitrogen, a very simple molecule. And I said, if this molecule can be this effective, what other kind of effects could be gotten by similar materials? So the first thing I did was stick a methyl group on down here. So now I have an amphetamine compound, and took it very cautiously. We're talking a lot today already about experiments with mice and with rats and with various animals. In my own case, the only animal I used was the human animal. I presume this is now a little awkward because of the various national and federal regulations that have come in, but I find that still the human animal is the only one that is really effective in evaluating and comparing these various psychedelic materials, and the work I do is still involved in that direction. Here's a material that is identical with mescaline. I called it trimethoxyamphetamine, TMA, and my golly, it was about twice as potent and totally different in its action. With the mescaline, I had this love and sensitivity to a flower that was on my coffee table where I was living. And under the TMA experience, I got very curious about it and tore it apart to see what was inside. Complete change of attitude toward something of precious beauty. One was an absolute cherishing, sort of a reverence, and the other was one of dissecting curiosity. And the activity was twice, so I went ahead and the methyl group did that. I put on ethyl, propyl, butyl, amyl, put all kinds of different groups on that position. That's one of the beauty things about having a little bit of fun with the art of chemistry is you can put things on and know where they're going and have ways of determining that your chemistry is going correctly. But the real charming thing, and the really, to me, exciting thing, was the fact each thing that you came up with was a new material. It had never been made before. So you're looking at a white crystalline solid in a little beaker there, and you've never seen it before. No one in the world has seen this before. As far as you know, no one in the universe has seen this before. It's a new thing you've just made. and it's never seen you before, so you, in essence, have no dialogue at all, how much do you start with? How much material do you use as a first experiment on a new chemical that's never been tried before by anyone? Well, obviously an amount that's small enough that it will not have any effect. But how small an amount is that? There's a very interesting additional nuance in this relationship that I developed over a period of time, that you go with great caution, decide what is an amount that would have no effect, and take 1/1000th of that amount. It doesn't take much, it takes time, but it doesn't take much more chemicals, because you use 1,000 up to where you were, you'd use another milligram perhaps. And so each of these materials had to be learned as an individual new meeting. And one of the outgrowths that I discovered is that the beauty of your final results of finding out what the effects are, you really can't be wrong. Because you'll say, I found that this material caused a visual enhancement of that and a recall of memories of this and this and yonder. Anyone else who tries it, who finds the same results, will say he is right. Anyone who tries it and doesn't get the results is, what did I do wrong? So in essence, you come up with a winner very nicely. Anyway, what I did, put these on there. The methyl group was twice as active. I put a propyl with no activity at all, the alpha ethyl mescaline. And by that time, I had made materials up to the 9 or 10 carbon chain, so I didn't bother trying them. I went back, put stuff on the nitrogen, here the nitrogen atom. No, it lost activity entirely. A couple of methyl groups out there, you can go almost a gram and not get any effects. Then you have the ring system. Now here you got really exciting. You have these 3 methoxy groups sticking out in the ring. If you can imagine a hexagon being held by a 2-carbon chain, you have the hexagon out here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 positions. 3 of them are occupied with methoxys. So here's your quiz of the day. How many ways can you put 3 methoxy groups on this 6-membered ring? They're different compounds. And the answer is 6. You can have 3, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 6, 2, 4, 6. If I had a slide, this would be obvious. Anyway, so I synthesized the other 5 compounds. And by golly, the 2, 4, 5 was 10 times as active. 2, 4, 6 was also very active and very interesting. The other 3 were absolute duds, nothing at all. So here, suddenly I now know that you can get much more potency and complexity, more stimulation, more eye dilation, but also psychedelic effects with, say, 2, 4, 5. So now you have a new material, TMA, I call it TMA2. You have 3 methoxy groups out here in those positions. Try each of them into an ethoxy. Gives you 3 more compounds, and only the 4 position was sensitive. So suddenly you have a position out there that gives you more potency. So I put other groups going out that way, and began realizing that there's a structure. These are all called phenethylamines, by the way. This structure is amenable to amplification, complexity increasing if you substitute here but not there. So that's where I go. We're talking earlier, some talk about neurotransmitters. It occurs to me that that position with the methoxy group, the methoxy group can metabolize off easily. What about putting a group out there that won't metabolize off? Instead of methoxy, put a methyl group out there. So I made the compound 2,5-dimethoxy-4-methylamphetamine. And I said, it's either going to be much more active, because it can't come off and be metabolized easily, and hence I'll have a more active compound, or it will not be active at all, but it will go into the neurotransmitter site that psychedelics go into, and if there's anything to the argument that these are neurologically activating sites, and may be activated by people who are with mental illness, you may have a therapy for mental illness. You can't lose. So I made the compound, tried it, and it turned out to be quite a bit more potent yet. This is a material called DOM, which that, of course, led to a whole new direction. If you have DOM out there, methyl, what about ethyl? Active compound, propyl, active compound. And if it's methyls and the propyls and so forth active, put a bromine out there, active compound, put an iodine out there, active compound. So the thought occurred to me, if you have an alkyl group that's DOB and DOI, DOM is the one that got off into San Francisco under the name of STP. I don't know if any of you are young enough to have known San Francisco in the 60s, but there was a STP, STP I should say, was very active at that time, and turned out that I found out that it was indeed DOM under another name, STP. They said serenity, tranquility, and placidity. was the name for it, and no one knew what placidity was, so it became serenity, tranquility, and peace, which was a little bit more understood. To the police authorities who did not like this idea of this going around, they didn't know what it was, they called it too stupid to puke, which was their counterpart to the days of the Haight-Ashbury clinic. And at this time, I was up in the hill in the medical school, and this was going out there, and I had no idea what STP was. One of my compounds, I had talked at a conference back in the East Coast, here in the East Coast, about a week or two earlier, and I had talked about the material and gave it structure, and I suspect it was just synthesized from this seminar I gave. Anyway, the bromo, funny world, the bromo compound, iodo compound, it occurred to me, maybe it is because this alkyl group was active, and you have what's called a lipophilicity or hydrophobicness, where something likes something that's fatty. And maybe if I put something on there that was water-loving, like a nitro group, it would not be active when it goes into the neurotransmitter receptor site. I put the nitro group active. Well, maybe it likes both, with putting its tail into this receptor site, going to the right that's lipophilic and to the left that's hydrophilic. What if I'm putting a group on that is not philic at all, namely fluorine? So I put on, I think it was trifluoroethyl-oxy analog, so I felt this would probably not be active at all, also active. So just getting the tail of the 4-position that molecule into the receptor site produced activity. So from that, the obvious steps were to go and take off the methyl group, get away from the amphetamine chain. So I took the methyl group off, and that gave 2CB, then 2CI, a host of other materials in the same ilk that was just a beautifully rich collection of compounds, many of them not as potent as the amphetamines, but shorter lived and much more benign and much more friendly than the corresponding amphetamines. So this is another thing. Somewhere along the line occurred to me: if oxygen does a good job, put a sulfur on there, and you get them now the 2CT family, 2CT2 up to about 2CT25 or so, of which about half of them are active. So this is kind of the hand-waving world of synthetic chemistry. I could go on for another 10, 15 minutes and get into tryptamines and go through the same complexities, but you have this as the active position. That is not as active. This is less active. Alkyl groups on tryptamines are much enhancing in nature and complexity of action. Alkyl groups, with the exception of MDMA and a couple of others, on the phenethylamines destroys the activity of the phenethylamines. So there are differences between these two families of compounds, but those differences are not negative, they are just informative. Anyway, that's kind of the picture of where I've been going for a while. I don't want to take too long here. I think a question has often come up is, how is this all going to work out? What are the goods and the bads of this entire area of psychedelic chemistry? Basically, the negatives are the terms many people, from law writers to people on the street, feel that this is an area of neurotoxicity, an area these materials cause neurological damage, cause people to lose control, commit crimes, and eventually collapse after 20 years of brain decomposition, which is, to a large measure, nonsense. However, I can't say completely excluded. I've been into it for 45 years, and I'm having my usual expected amount of brain deterioration. But I don't think it's that serious yet, so I hope to have another decade or two of reasonable responses. And you have the increasing urge to put laws against these things, because the psychology, the propaganda that they are negative, that they do damage, is very real and very much believed by many people. I've been often asked, why use the word psychedelic? It itself is a pejorative term. I mean, there are empathogens, entheogens, hallucinogens, psychotomimetics, other terms that are used widely in medicine that carry other messages but do not carry the intrinsic negativeness of the term psychedelic. Well, my main argument for continuing to use the term is that people may not approve of what you're working in or what you're saying, but at least they know what you're talking about. You stop 9 people on Market Street, 10 people, 9 people, you say, I work with empathogens. When they ask you what you do, they have no idea what you're talking about. 9 people out of 10, when you tell that you're working with psychedelics, would maybe not approve, but at least they know what you're working with. So the idea of using a term that is in popular usage, I consider to be quite positive. Well, my clock is still going. The clock is supposed to go flash 3 minutes from stopping, and the clock has stopped. So I don't know where I am. Let me wrap things up a little bit. What are the positives? I consider the positives to be my main incentive for doing the work I've done for the last half century and continuing to do it now, is I believe in this collection of materials you're going to develop tools that are going to answer many of the questions that have been brought up today. Namely, how can you find out how the brain works you can use a rat? How does the mind work? What kind of a probe can you make to look at the function of the mind? To me, it's going to be a psychedelic material that has very little action in experimental animals, to look into actions in man that are not seen in experimental animals. Namely, the idea of using these materials as eventual research tools, I consider to be extremely, extremely valuable. I think what I'll do, a point came up during lunch today. It brought up an interesting story that I think pretty well puts this into perspective about the need of tools for exploring research tools for exploring this area of understanding the function of the mind. It was Eric this morning was talking about animals being invested with the properties of schizophrenia. And this was some years ago, back in the good old days before there were many inhibitory actions on human studies, FDA approval, disapproval, get clearance from the DEA, clearance from everything like that before you do any human experiments. Your board of your university has to see the research and approve of it. A lot of this experimental work was done back in the halcyon days when there were no such things as research approval boards. I mean, in Berkeley, we had the run of the place. We, could fire up a cyclotron and make an isotope and use it and try it in. Their argument at Donner Labs, that was the Donner, then it went up on the hill in Lawrence Lab, was stay if you want and do whatever you want. The tools are here. Here's a cyclotron. Here's your PET scanner. Do whatever you want, but just remember, when you leave, turn off the lights and lock the door. And we could work through the night there, doing experiments, all kinds of beautiful things. I remember one time, let me use this as sort of a wind-up. We had this was maybe 3 or 4 decades ago. It's quite popular opinion that methionine was involved with schizophrenia, because some experiments had been done in which people who were schizophrenic were given methionine-rich diets, and their symptoms became worse, and yet those people who were not diagnosed as schizophrenics with the methionine-rich diet had no changes at all. So we talked about this, pros and cons, and it was a neat experiment. What I did, I took I remember it was acetylmethionine methionine or some compound in that area, and I tucked on a fluorine 18, which makes it a positron emitter, which means you can go into a PET scanner and put this into a person and put the head of the person attached to the head. So, no, that doesn't sound good. You have the person lie down on a little cot with the head going into a positron camera, and you've had a section of the brain just above the earlobes that tells you where that chemical went. Being a positron emitter, it didn't have to have any reaction in the body. It just went where it went. And what we did, this was work done with Tony a few decades ago. I made this material. In fact, I made 10 batches over a period of time. The half-life of fluorine is a little less than 2 hours, so you can't make a lot of it and keep it for a while. And he had good friends up at Mendocino Hospital, and he came back with names of 5 schizophrenic patients who were up at the hospital, and we had their names and the backgrounds of them. And in Lawrence Lab, I managed to find 5 normal controls. That was a bit more tricky, but we did. And 10 batches of this, and we did 10 experiments. We put the material into these 10 people about a week apart, and in each case, put them into the PET scanner. I remember one of the schizophrenics Tony had a lot of problems with because he did not like radioactivity. And he said radioactivity is bad. So we had down at Donner a great big sort of a background counter. It's a big room with a big iodine crystal of 30-some-odd inches in diameter, and walls 3 inches thick lead overhead and the side. And Tony very nicely told him, if you go in here and spend a half an hour, he'll give you a magazine, leave the light on. If you go in here and spend a half an hour in here your body will be so depleted of radiation that when we take you up in the hill and put you in the positive camera, it'll bring you back to normal. You'll be okay. He believed it. Anyway, to wrap up with the result of the experiment, it was a fascinating thing. We ran 10 studies. We had 10 photographs of the fluorine-18 disposition in the brain, and the 10 photographs were absolutely different from one another. There was no consistency through this group at all. And so we put them on the wall of the medical radiation thing up in the hill. And across the back of the wall, every time someone would come in from Washington to give a seminar or come in from somewhere of any importance, we say, by the way, here are 10 photographs of the fluorine-18 labeled material we gave. 5 of these are schizophrenic patients, and 5 of them are normals. Which do you think are normals? Which do you think are schizophrenics? And we got absolutely random answers. No pattern could be found at all. Then about 3 months later, one of the schizophrenic patients who liked Tony very much came down to visit and see how everything was going on. Very nice visit. And they were talking for a while, and he saw these 10 photographs on the wall. And he said, "Are those the 10 pictures you took of us?" Tony said, "Yeah." And he looked at one and said, "Oh, I reckon that's me." And he pointed to number 7 or one of them over there. And he's absolutely right. He identified his own photograph from the PET scan of the distribution of that fluorine-18 thing. And Tony very mildly, casually said, "Oh, you're right, absolutely right. How'd you know?" "Oh," he said, "that you see that little sort of star-shaped shiny thing in the bottom right corner? A little star-shaped thing?" "Yeah." "I see it all the time." So, we have a long way to go before we really can understand how the mind works. But this is a start. Thank you very much. There has been a very recent, quite a bit of increase of use of psychedelics in various therapeutic applications. The studies are going on in Los Angeles and one other area, I forget where, of the use of something like psilocybin or MDMA in administering to people who have terminal cancer to alleviate the anxiety of that. These have been quite successful. There have been studies in the post-traumatic syndrome, again, to relieve anxiety. There are probably half a dozen such studies either underway now or in the machinery of approval to be done. The primary negative of this entire area is the public opinion, the legal status, the general attitude of the authorities that any work with these materials is probably basically evil. Makes the getting a permission from the authorities, be it health, be it drug authorities, virtually impossible to get. And hence there will be a long struggle for any of these studies to become real. The funding is no question. The funding is available from many sources. It's the machinery of the permission getting that has been difficult. This I don't see being softened at all until as has happened in Europe to some extent and more, this entire area of research moves from legal control to medical control. And I think that transformation will probably allow many of these studies to be done.